ignorance supremacy and gasoline supremacy. We'll call it economic reconciliation. While the woke police want to put the cancel culture rebels back in the institution and pull the global civilization back to the medieval period when gay people and witchy people were the first victims of the last few centuries of really strange stuff. Well, so you get to this today, 2024. I can look on videos, feeds, comments, and I can see people defending the idea that we did away with sexism, we did away with racism, we did away with residential schools, and we don't have to do anything more. We don't have to do anything more. So I had this political cartoon in my head thinking of Danielle Smith in Alberta, Pierre Poilievre, and then John Rustad, a BC Conservative leader candidate for the next election. On the Truth and Reconciliation Day, he said he would just pull BC out, undo the DRIPA confirmation. And a while before that, he claimed that honoring what the courts uphold as Aboriginal title that cannot be argued against would be a disruption to the BC economic reconciliation. So how do we combat this idea that the bad stuff is done and over with in terms of perspectives? Well, I'll put it to this way. The loud noises out on the traffic. You can't hear them now because it just happens to be quiet right now, but those loud engines. It's like gasoline guzzling. It takes a lot of ignorance to keep guzzling so much gasoline when it's so damaging and dangerous to the ecology of the earth. We know that climate change is real. We know that Florida Republican Marjorie Greene says they are controlling the weather to hurt Republicans. Okay. Danielle Smith this week was talking about, I'm looking into chemtrails. Don't worry. Her attendant said she just said that to make the person think, she was looking into it. She's not actually doing the things she's saying she's doing. That was the official reply, I guess. So we got Gregory Bates in Steps to an Ecology of Mind. I bring this one up a lot. What's on the back of it? What's on the back of that book? How do ideas interact? Is there some sort of natural selection which allows one idea to live and another to die? What limits the multiplicity of ideas in a given region of the mind? What are the necessary conditions for stability or survival of the mind? Isn't it the body? These are some of the questions this book raises. It does so in a manner which allows them to be meaningfully explored and thus considered ecologically necessary to the human condition. A valuable document of inner space. So Gregory Bateson wrote a bunch of essays in here about schizophrenia. I used it to self-diagnose. You can probably agree. So if you're not disagreeing that I'm schizophrenic and a little off my rocker, then why not, give some value to the ideas? Well, the establishment at the time blamed him for blaming mothers for schizophrenia. they didn't like that he criticized pathology in relationship and disordered power structures. So he was kind of tossed to the side, and mothers were free to have their parental rights, I guess, is how we would talk about it today. And strangely, down south of the border, strange topic, as the voices against gun manufacturing and violence in the media get louder, mothers have now started to be arrested for manslaughter charges directly. When the establishment is threatened, they'll blame anyone they want, is what I learned from my early reading as a teenager and my current experience today. So, yeah. What does... Which one do I want first? This one, maybe, yeah. We've got this huge book. It's The History of Madness by Michel Foucault. And I just got a couple paragraphs here. Later, we read that since the end of the 18th century, that's the 1700s, the life of unreason no longer manifests itself except in the flashes of lightning found in works like those of Hölderlin, Nerval, Nietzsche, and Artaud, which resisted through their own strength that gigantic moral imprisonment. Standard French history and Standard French history and iconography of psychiatry represents Pinel casting off the chains of madmen soon after the Bastille had fallen. So that is a story of liberating the mad. Here we are told that the new moral treatment of insanity was also the imprisonment of unreason that had flashed so openly on the canvases of Hieronymus Bosch. Casual reference books diagnose Hölderlin as a schizophrenic poet. Reminds me of myself. Nietzsche as a philosopher suffering from dementia caused by terminal syphilis, and Artaud as a bipolar manic-depressive playwright. Nerval killed himself. We say dying by suicide is caused by severe depressive illness. It is a central thesis of this book that, far from these being inevitable ways of conceiving of four very strange men, it requires a specific organization of thought to categorize them. And so many other people in terms of mental disorder. Foucault does not pander to the thought that genius and mental disturbance are of a piece. The art of these men, as he shouts at the end of the book, is the exact opposite of insanity. Where there is an oeuvre, there is no madness. I'll repeat something I learned earlier this year studying epilepsy, which I was diagnosed with a few years ago, but have been fascinated with since I was a teenager and was already exhibiting symptoms. I did go for an EEG once, which confirmed a negative, but that's not a false. It doesn't. They showed that there was not a wave at that moment, but I felt really calm during the EEG. So different moments, different brain waves, and different theories that exist today than did decades ago. So I learned that in the 13 or 1400s, when this was beginning, History of Madness started off, there was a nice fellow, a good man, who took it upon himself to say, hey, Consider the man who simply merely falls over and shakes on the ground. If he is not too mean and ill-tempered, maybe he doesn't need to dwell in the asylum with the lunatics and murderers for the rest of his life. And it wasn't until hundreds of years later that we saw like epileptics, schizophrenics, etc., not being really viciously, being like cruelly pushed down by the I'll get to this one. Creation of patriarchy. The problems where I started with various ministers and premiers and conservatives or liberals. They're very much in the same camp with the decision-making back and forth processes of a alternative vote or first past the post stuff that they're doing, pushing. We had John Rustad say, we have to focus on economic reconciliation and on the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, he said he wanted to pull out BC from DRIPA, Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And this wishy-washy back and forth is the unreason that Foucault talks about, the unreason. Eby and Rustad can say anything they want about locking me up because someone's afraid of me for talking loudly about petrochemicals and ideas, like the protesters at Clayoquot Sound. I was one of them, but that's a story for another day. Well, you see, that idea of knowledge of the issues that they're pushing on people, which is actually very, very unreasonable when you ask legal experts and everyone. Like, let's take the liberal example of Public Service Alliance Canada. The report that came out and information through a freedom of information type of request that the PSAC made, they know undoubtedly that the Liberal government had zero compelling reason to push public service workers into the office mandatory instead of the more productive, more equitable, flexible telework policy. I read, I forget her last name right now, or her first name right now. I forget her first name right now, but D'Souza, who said that instead of promoting such a model of better work for the workers and people served, the public, to a broader range of Canadians, the government suppressed all the research they could, the internal documents, internal research that said, what are you doing this for? They pushed ahead with it anyway. A couple of my videos ago, I talked about how involuntary medical treatment for addictions and mental health is a similar kind of forced thing. In a recent leaders debate, Sonia Furstenau in the BC Green leader said that the programs that Eby and Rustad want to force upon people, which is forced treatment, where they take away the pharmaceutical prescriptions that are safely saving people, and they allow the illegal drug trade to keep toxifying people's lives and killing them, has a under 4% success rate. There are many, many, many more reasonable things to do, but they don't want to. They don't want to do what's reasonable. Let's see. The creation of patriarchy. What is patriarchy? What is patriarchy? Ha, ha, ha. Sex-determined separate spheres as defined in the cult of true womanhood became the prevalent ideology as men institutionalized their dominance in the economy, in education, and in politics. Women were encouraged to adjust to their subordinate status by an ideology which gave their maternal function higher significance. Higher significance. In the early decades of the 19th century, American women in practice and thought redefined on their own the position they should hold in society. While early feminists accepted the existence of separate spheres as a given, they transformed the meaning of this concept by arguing for women's right and duty to enter the public sphere because of the superiority of her values and the strength embodied in her maternal role. So there is now a rich body of modern anthropological evidence available which describes relatively egalitarian societal arrangements and complex and varied solutions by societies to the problem of the division of labor. Just to go step out of this paragraph for 1 second, I've heard all sorts of comments about you'll never get over war, you'll never get over violence, you'll never get over good and evil, you'll never get over people bopping you in the nose. I had a video about stopping violence last week. Someone in the comments literally said, bomb, like, what was it, detonating bombs is natural or something. Like, what? Like, detonating bombs are a natural part of life, or like what? Like, it's what? Okay, the literature is based largely on modern tribal societies with a few examples from the 19th century. This raises the problem, especially for the historian, as to the validity of such information for generalizations about prehistoric peoples. At any rate, from the available data, it appears that the most egalitarian societies are to be found among hunting-gathering tribes which are characterized by economic interdependency. Interdependency. Not capitalism or communism. Those are 20th century ideologies. A woman must secure the services of a hunter in order to be assured of a meat supply for herself and her children. A hunter must be assured of a woman who will supply him with subsistence food for the hunt, and in the event the hunt is unsuccessful. As we have earlier observed, in such societies, women supply the major share of the food consumed, yet the product of the hunt is everywhere considered the most valued food and is used for gift exchanges. Such hunting-gathering tribes stress economic cooperation and tend to live peacefully with other tribes. Competition is ritualized in contests of singing or athletics, but is not encouraged in daily living. Detonating bombs every day natural? As usual, scholars in the field disagree in their interpretations of the evidence. And the bots disagree. But the most thorough survey of the evidence yields the generalization that in such societies, the relative status of men and women is separate but equal. That was undone for the rest of the book, the creation of patriarchy. It got kind of messy it got by 4,000s of years, 4 or 5,000s of years. Yeah, that's how long it was, about or so. So let's see. But in these systems, woman as a concept, a collective entity, an individual, is marginal or subsumed. In accepting such dialogue, thinking woman stays far longer than is useful within the boundaries or the question setting defined by the great men. So, see, it's hard for me to reread this sentence after a while, but let's see, I'll try again. In accepting such dialogue, thinking woman stays far longer than is useful within the boundaries of the question, thinking woman. So it's thinking woman. Thinking woman is a type of thing. It's even hard for the male language that's coursed through my brain for this many decades to think of that. A thinking man. That comes across instantly. Interesting, right? It's maybe not for everyone, but for me, right? And I'm pretty wordy. In accepting such dialogue, thinking woman stays far longer than is useful within the boundaries or the question setting defined by the great men. That is what the meaning was. And just as long as she does, the source of new insight is closed to her. Revolutionary thought has always been based on upgrading the experience of the oppressed. The peasant had to learn to trust in the significance of his life experience before he could dare to challenge the feudal lords. The industrial worker had to become class conscious, the black race conscious, before liberating thought could develop into revolutionary theory. The oppressed have acted and learned simultaneously. The process of becoming the newly conscious person or group is in itself liberating. So with women. The shift in consciousness we must make occurs in 2 steps. We must, at least for a time, be woman-centered. We must, as far as possible, leave patriarchal thought behind. To my original point, sexism is not done with. We're not done with sexism. Have to keep deconstructing it. To be woman-centered means asking if women were central to this argument. How would it be defined? It means ignoring all evidence of women's marginality, because even where women appear to be marginal, this is the result of patriarchal intervention. Frequently, also, it is merely an appearance. The basic assumption should be that it is inconceivable for anything ever to have taken place in the world in which women were not involved, except if they were prevented from participation through coercion and repression. When using methods and concepts from traditional systems of thought, it means using them from the vantage point of the centrality of women. Women cannot be put into the empty spaces of patriarchal thought and systems. In moving to the center, they transform the system. To step outside of patriarchal thought means being skeptical toward every known system of thought, being critical of all assumptions, ordering, values, and definitions. Testing one's statement by trusting your own, the female experience, since such experience has usually been trivialized or ignored. It means overcoming the deep-seated resistance within ourselves toward accepting ourselves and our knowledge as valid. It means getting rid of the great men in our heads and substituting them ourselves, our sisters, our anonymous foremothers. Being critical toward our own thought, which is, after all, thought trained in the patriarchal tradition. Finally, it means developing intellectual courage, the courage to stand alone, the courage to reach farther than our grasp, the courage to risk failure. Perhaps the greatest challenge to thinking women is the challenge to move from the desire for safety and approval to the most unfeminine quality of all, that of intellectual arrogance, the supreme hubris which asserts to itself the right to reorder the world, the hubris of the God makers, the hubris of the male system builders. What does that mean? Oh yeah, have you ever heard an ignorant man talk about a strong woman? Oh yeah, of course. The system of patriarchy is a historic construct. It has a beginning. It will have an end. Engine out there. I wonder if that's the engine I was thinking about when I started making this video. It has a beginning, it will have an end, just like the gasoline. Its time seems to have nearly run its course. It no longer serves the needs of men or women, and in its inextricable linkage to militarism, hierarchy, and racism, it threatens the very existence of life on Earth. What will come after? What kind of structure will be the foundation for alternate forms of social organization? We cannot yet know. We are living in an age of unprecedented transformation. We are in the process of becoming. But we already know that woman's mind, at last unfettered after so many millennia, will have its share in providing vision, ordering solutions. Women, at long last, are demanding, as men did in the Renaissance, the right to explain, the right to define. Women, in thinking themselves out of patriarchy, add transforming insights to the process of redefinition. As long as both men and women regard the subordination of half the human race to the other as natural, it is impossible to envision a society in which differences do not connote either dominance or subordination. The feminist critique of the patriarchal edifice of knowledge is laying the groundwork for a correct analysis of reality, one which, at the very least, can distinguish the whole from a part. Women's history, the essential tool in creating feminist consciousness in women, is providing the body of experience against which new theory can be tested and the ground on which women of vision can stand. A feminist worldview will enable women and men to free their minds from patriarchal thought and practice, and at last to build a world free of dominance and hierarchy, a world that is truly human. So, um, I've mentioned a few times residential school denialism. Um, it's something that, like, right now in Canada, people are saying not to look for bodies at the schools, not to divulge records from the church, to not keep looking into things, to let it be in the past as though it's not currently still here. The issues, the realities, it's still here. Nothing in the past has disappeared. Nothing in the past is gone. We can possibly heal. I've heard that. I've heard First Nations say that some of the things that happened could never be reconciled economically or emotionally, but hopefully our societies can heal moving forward, and these injustices hopefully shall never ever happen again. The past is here. We move forward. We are not gone. The world is not gone. So it's, before talking about the evidence for such a view, think about the um, the freedom of women in Canada. How did women get the vote? It was in 1918, 1919 or so, that there was a general strike in Winnipeg, Manitoba, where some of the most interesting stuff is happening politically, really, in Canada, I think. There's a lot of amazing stuff happening in Winnipeg and Manitoba. Um, well, there was a general strike because the women who were working on machines and in the fields didn't like that they were suffering so much. And, like, well, there was a general strike, okay? So this was kind of overlapping with international strike movements where workers in the developing, industrializing 20th century were saying, like, Gerda Lerner is talking about the peasants in earlier Europe. We were going through that in Canada in the early 1900s. So, as I read about it, there was a large scale strike. Women and people of color, um, indigenous people, Métis people, and they were organizing together. And it's like May Day, right? Um, they might have not stopped the like the idle no more kind of mentality and vibe that was going on in 1918. And the solution for the federal government at the time was to publish lots of newspaper articles in Vancouver and Ottawa and etc. about how the Bolsheviks were invading Canada from the inside out, because already the East Coast and the West Coast were being instructed to be very, very afraid of Bolsheviks for the fear that they might take the jobs away, or money away, or power away, or self-ownership away of something like that. Like, they're delusional. Pull up my books again, right? So it's like, anyway, so Um, the solution for the federal government ultimately also was to give women the vote. Oh, wait, only white women. Oh, wait, some of the Métis are mixed up with white men and Native men and all this. And okay, we have to sort this out so as few people that we don't like get a vote. That was the official response of the government at that time. It's absolutely true that it happened. It's not worthy of me proving. You can go look it up. It's like just look it up, right? So 1918 general strike. Women got the vote. But who didn't get the vote? Look that up. So, and if we, something I learned last week in regards to the recent talk all over about the denial of residential schools was from Pam Palmatter's show, which you can see on YouTube. I'll link in the video description, where I learned that even in like 1930, there were newspaper articles being published about how many people, Canadians of the public, really thought what was happening in the church-run, government-owned schools with the school program could easily amount to manslaughter, charges under the Canadian Charter that already existed without any amendments from the UN and the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People and the Truth and Reconciliation. Way back in 1930, it looked like manslaughter. And so those realities of broad knowledge, which only seems to not be perfectly widespread due to extreme lengths of misinformation tactics, is why it looks today like it makes sense to say to some people that, well, gee, wasn't it only a few high-ranking officials that were doing bad stuff? Everyone else thought it was good happening. It just wasn't true. That idea was always a lie. The reality was that the racism and the colonization was always happening. It's like the gay people and queer people and spiritual people who were not of the same religion as the hierarchical patriarchy and dominant class, that those people were basically like tortured before the 1800s and 1700s and 1600s, tortured for hundreds of years, driving us mad. Oh my gosh. With schizophrenia, um, a, a serious symptom is dissociation. Dissociation is really frightening, and um, people can like kind of almost black out. They're not sure of where they are. They're not sure of reality. They're in like a dissociative fugue. They're not in reality. They're not connected. The current governments that are afraid of these people lashing out when you go and touch them and their instinctual body lashes out because the universe is actually threatening them day in, day out. I was reading that Black people with schizophrenia who are not supported in our societies have a way higher level of dissociation than white schizophrenics. I have dissociation sometimes, but when I walk around and I see a First Nations person or a Black person and they're having trouble, it, it's scary to know that there's so many forces against them the interacting ideas, the natural selection. It's creepy how much goes on in history that that this like political cartoon occurring in my mind of these leaders like proclamating their vision of how we need to axe the tax and wait, was it um John Rustad said that 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 taking like you like oh right, he said about the land title agreements that allowing First Nations in BC to have title in terms of negotiating agreements of what land uses will go on their lands, it Rustad interprets as taking from BC economy to give back, to give to others. Taking from BC economy to give to others. He said taking from BC to give to others. But it's only giving back to the First Nations. It's returning peace to the land. It's securing ecological futures for more of us. The only thing it takes from is nothing. So this political cartoon, because the world, the YouTube, the innerverse, the outerverse, everything's laughing all the time. But the schizophrenic in me laughs, and everyone sees how serious the idea is. I just shook my hands, how serious the idea is to me, and that's why I'm laughing, because it's so crazed, which is like that lunatic laughing thing, like that, like just the way the media pictures schizophrenics, like we're all crazy laughing with a knife and we're screaming and violent. Well, I can see the politicians yammering at each other, screaming at each other about jewel encrusted tubs and being gay instead of fighting climate change, like happened on September 25th in Question Period. Go look it up. You can listen to the whole thing on YouTube. I recommend it. Well, I I see those that political cartoon on the cover of a newspaper, and I see Canadian workers reading the newspaper. Canadian workers and Canadian like oh wait. Yeah. We'll go to here. Creation of patriarchy. We'll go to we'll go right to the point here. They are white straight people that think residential schools didn't happen, and they literally don't like cancel culture. I'm just talking about reality. I'm not canceling culture. I'm talking about history. I'm talking about what happened. I'm talking about what really happened. I haven't said cancel anything. I have defended the truth. I have defended justice in these words, but I haven't told them to cancel themselves. I've told them that they're a hierarchical dominant class that's hurting things, hurting the ecology, hurting one another. So I see these white people that are angry at each other, that like they're angry at each other and they're angry at me, they're angry at the world. Some of them are angry at conservatives, some of them are angry at liberals, but like almost all of them say, don't vote green because you'll be wasting your vote, you'll be wasting your vote, you'll be wasting your vote, don't vote green, you'll be wasting your vote, don't be wasting your vote, don't be wasting your vote. They keep just repeating that for 25 years, for 25 years, for 25 years. It's like, come on, guys. Yeah. They keep promising things for 25 years, and we keep saying maybe they'll do it this time. Isn't that called insanity? Doing the same thing again and again and again and expecting a different result? I've heard that a lot. And there's more definitions than that, right? There's a lot more definitions than that. So I see these crowd, and I got the idea from a guy outside who has a license plate, not an EV. And when he drives, it's why? He's angry at the world. He's angry at the idea of being quiet and calm and humble. So these people that are like, yeah, we're not allowed to be sexist. We're not allowed to be racist anymore. Well, we've still got ignorant supremacy and gasoline supremacy. Ignorant supremacy and gasoline supremacy. We'll call it economic reconciliation.